everyone. So thank you, Sophie, for the introduction. As you mentioned, I'm Bryce. I'm a product manager on the integrations team at Trustpilot. I've been there for about 1.5 years. I'm originally from the US, and now I live in Copenhagen. And if you're not familiar with Trustpilot, we are an online review platform, and that means every day we depend on people like you to leave honest reviews about the companies you have experiences with so that others can have more confidence when making purchasing decisions. And simply, we help businesses build trust with their customers. And in fact, it's in our mission to be a universal symbol of trust. So that means if you see a business with a 5-star rating, you can believe that rating because we have a trustworthy platform. And with trust being in our mission, we've spent a lot of time thinking about the concept, why it's important, and how we can earn it with the businesses and the customers who use our platform. So today I'll be sharing with you what we've learned and how you can do the same. Just a quick question. Are you seeing who's entering the room at the top of my screen? Okay, good. Let's move on. So it's an interesting time to work in the world of trust because this Time magazine cover is from 2017 and basically saying there's no trust in the world. And 4 years later, not much has changed. We're really still in a trust crisis. So it should be no surprise that a majority of customers don't trust companies. 54% of customers don't believe that companies have their best interests in mind. So this indicates that when a customer sees your business for the first time, they're starting in a place of distrust, and it's really your job as the business to earn their trust. But before we go deeper, let's take a step back, because what even is trust? It's a feeling and an emotion, and you know when you have it, but it's actually pretty hard to define. So I'd like to understand what you understand trust to mean. So if you can write a definition of what you think it means in the chat, then we can kind of review that together before going into a more official definition, if you will. Honesty, yeah. Honesty is a good definition of trust, for sure. And transparency, yes. We'll talk about trust and transparency a bit later. Having faith, yeah. Integrity. These are all really great definitions. And, one-word answers, which it means it's really tough to define, right? Reliable, won't rip you off. Yeah, all these things are very related to trust. Thanks for those answers. The one that we usually use at Trustpilot comes from Rachel Botsman. She's been studying trust for over a decade, and she defines trust as a confident relationship with the unknown. So trust is a thing that allows us to place our faith in unknown people, technology, and companies. And it's interesting because risk and uncertainty is really related to trust. If you're 100% sure of the outcome, you really don't need trust. So now that we kind of align on a definition, let's talk about why you should care about building trust. One thing maybe comes to mind when we talk about trust, which is avoiding mistrust. So you want to avoid becoming the next Facebook scandal, right? Distrust can have big consequences. But if you build it properly with your users, it can have really big benefits for your business. So this study said more than 90% of customers say trust in a company makes them buy more products more frequently and become a loyal customer. Or in product terms, more power users. So that's great. And at this point, you may be thinking, okay, I see why trust is important, but why should I care? Isn't it our branding team or a PR team's job to make sure customers trust in our brand? And it's definitely their responsibility too, but this is why you should care about building trust specifically in your product. The first is that trust is very hard to scale. So a quick way to build trust is to talk to a support or a salesperson. They can answer your questions and address your concerns. And talking to a human is really nice for customers, but it's expensive for the business, right? And it's especially not scalable if you have a freemium product with a bunch of free customers using your product. But technology, on the other hand, is much easier and cheaper to scale. The second reason is that trust really isn't earned through big PR campaigns or big gestures. It's earned continuously over time and in very small interactions. So even if you talk to a nice salesperson and you think, okay, I trust this company, maybe you get off the phone with them and then encounter a big bug on the website, then you can lose trust in that company quite easily. So that's why, as a product person, you should be thinking every user interaction is an opportunity to build or break trust. And trust should be a product principle that you embed into every decision you make. And we've learned that doing that definitely is not easy, but there's a lot of ways that you can build trust into your product. So let's talk about how to do that. The first thing you should do is define what trust means for your product. So to illustrate why this is important, let's go through an example. Uber, Amazon, or Facebook. Think in your head and write it down in the chat about which company you trust the most. And make sure to also answer why you trust that company the most. Okay, Amazon, 2 answers for them. One because they're reliable, and the second because they give you refunds easily if something goes wrong. That's true. Anyone else? Or is Amazon easily the best answer there? Yeah, another one for Amazon. Delivery is reliable. Okay, well, maybe Amazon is the clear answer here. Okay, one for Uber, because I worked for them one time and knew that they improved a lot since the missteps in the past. That's a good point. And Uber, when I order a taxi, it comes. So there are different answers here, and you'll notice that the answers were different for each person and very different based on the company, right? So if we think about maybe common answers, why you would say, I trust Uber, I trust Amazon, you know, Uber gets you to your destination safely and they hopefully treat their drivers fairly. Whereas one of you mentioned that Amazon delivers your packages on time, and maybe we care that they give vendors equal opportunity on their website. So it's important to understand that what drives trust is very different for each company, but there is a commonality, which is these first reasons all mention or talk about, does the company just deliver on its promise? Is it doing its job well? And that's good news, because as a product person, you're probably already working towards this goal and making sure that your product is usable and delivers on its promise. But the second reason on these lists are very subjective and dependent on the industry or what product it is. So it's important to kind of think about what are the specific things that drive or break trust for your specific product. So some examples of things that impact trust at Trustpilot. One is that we have to think about, does this feature we're building help us paint a more accurate picture of a business on trustpilot.com? Secondly, we have a platform that's open and it's used by customers and businesses. And of course, we have a stake in things too. So we have to make sure that we're balancing everyone's needs equally. And then once we have those considerations, we made them more actionable by putting them into what we call the Trust Playbook. So this allows us to create a shared language, and consider impact on trust whenever we're building new features. Okay, so now that you've defined what trust means for your company, it's actually time to prioritize it. So you might have heard of this guy, Marty Kagan. If you haven't read his book, Inspired, definitely read it. He's a thought leader in product management, and he talks about the big 4 risks. So that's value, usability, feasibility, and business viability. And that's what you should consider to make your product successful, right? And at Trustpilot, we definitely consider a 5th risk, which is trust. And so we think about the 5 big risks. And it's easy enough to put trust here on the list. But the truth is, when you're actually day-to-day in product development, prioritizing trust is difficult. Why is it so difficult? So first, you say, I would prioritize trust, but this is just one small feature. How much impact could it have? But remember, every user interaction is an opportunity to build a big trust. So even the small features matter here, and over time they have a big impact. One example of this, maybe you've seen The Social Dilemma, that movie on Netflix. It's a documentary about how social media companies have grown to manipulate users to become addicted to their platforms. And it wasn't one single designer, product manager, developer at these companies that made the social apps addictive. It really happened with small features over time. And the same goes for trust. So even the small moments matter. Okay, maybe you say, I would prioritize trust, but this cool feature would really increase adoption for my product. So let's not think about trust right now. This happened recently in our team. I'm working on the integrations team, and we were looking to build a new integration with our partner, Smile.io. And if you don't know Smile, they're an awesome platform. They allow businesses to create customer reward programs, and the businesses determine what customers need to do to earn points, and then give rewards to customers who earn those points. And we thought, great, okay, this is an awesome opportunity to combine Trustpilot with Smile and create a cool integration. So this was the integration. For example, this customer, Sylvia, would leave a review for Plant House on Trustpilot, and then she would be rewarded from Smile.io with points, and then she can use those points to get a discount on her next purchase. Simple enough, and it would benefit all parties. Plant House would get more Trustpilot reviews, Sylvia would get a discount on her next purchase, and more reviews on Trustpilot overall. Great for all parties. But going back to our trust playbook, we had to think about, okay, but does this actually help us paint a more accurate picture of the business on Trustpilot.com? And more specifically, do review incentives help us paint a more accurate picture of a business? And unfortunately, the answer is no, because if Sylvia gets an incentive to write a review, she might feel influenced to write a more positive review on Trustpilot. So while this was an awesome opportunity and Smile is a great platform, unfortunately, to prioritize trust, we couldn't move forward with the integration. And we had to, kill our darling. So even though it's hard, it's important to prioritize trust over a lot of the things that we care about as product people. Because even if you have a product that provides a lot of value and makes revenue, eventually, if you lose trust with your customers, they will leave. And on the flip side, if you build trust into everything you do, you can really still achieve all the things that you care about, value, retention, adoption, even while building trust. So when we talked about the definition of trust before, someone wrote transparency, which is exactly right. It's really tough to talk about trust without also talking about transparency. And it's interesting to consider their relationship to one another. So for example, if you have full trust, you really don't need transparency. For example, if you trust your partner, you're probably not looking at their text messages all the time to see what they're doing, right? But you can use transparency to build trust in moments where there is distrust. So if you did suspect that your partner was cheating, maybe reading their text messages would reassure you and help you build that trust again. So bringing that back to a product context, you can be transparent in moments of user uncertainty. And when we say transparency in a product context, this usually means visibility of an underlying process, sharing data, or explaining how maybe confusing areas of your product work. And it's important to choose the right moments to be transparent. One of those reasons is because you might risk overloading your user with information. If you are transparent about all your data and underlying processes of your product, your user is going to get overwhelmed and leave. The other risk is that you can actually, if you're transparent in the wrong moment, reduce trust. This is like if your partner, out of the blue, when you trust them, shows you all their text messages and says, hey, don't worry, I have nothing to hide. It would make you think, do you have something to hide, right? So you have to make sure you're transparent in a moment where they're actually not trusting you. This happened to us recently when we were building a new integration on my team. So this is an integration where we had to track some data from businesses, and we thought, oh, that can be a scary moment. So we should be transparent and reassure them, hey, don't worry, we're using this data for internal use only. And then when we tested this copy on businesses, they saw that line and they thought, for internal use only, like, what are you doing with my other data then? And so we thought this was a moment that they would be uncertain, but because they weren't questioning that in the first place, it actually had the opposite effect and it reduced trust. So make sure that when you define what trust means for your product, go through the user journey and identify spots where there can be mistrust or there's a lot of complexity. And that can be a great opportunity to be more transparent and build trust with your users. And in this previous example, we wouldn't have learned that this is a wrong moment to build transparency or to be transparent if we hadn't tested it with user interviews. So that's the final important piece. And user interviews are kind of product 101, right? But I'd like to highlight it here for two reasons. One is it's really tough to identify the right moments to be transparent without understanding what emotions are running through the user's head at any moment as they navigate the product, right? And even if you find the right moment to be transparent, you need to validate that that user cares about the information you're presenting to them and make sure they understand it. So usability testing is key here. And then secondly, trust, it's an emotion, right? So it's really tough to measure quantitatively. So we found that the best way to measure it is just by looking at that specific feature or product and testing it with users and asking them how it changes their view of your overall product. So if you remember nothing else from today, remember that every user interaction is an opportunity to build trust with your users. And you should harness that opportunity because it can have a really big impact on your business. So make sure to define what trust means for your product, actually prioritize it, even though it's tough sometimes. You can be transparent in user uncertainty moments, and then finally test the impact. And I know it's a big ask to ask product people to prioritize something new, but I hope you do because it can actually have a pretty big impact. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Bryce. My cogs are turning in my brain right now. I work in the insurance department of OVO, so like trust is always kind of at the forefront of those types of products. So I'm wondering, where have I not prioritized trust? Where can I do that better? That was really, really interesting. Thank you so much. I'll pass over to Rachel for the Q&A.
Hey, that was awesome, Bryce. I'm also thinking from a product marketing perspective about everything you've just said there. Guys, drop questions in the chat bot, and we'll try and get through as many as possible in the time we've got left with Bryce. So I've got one here from Douglas Bryce. He's asking about the Smile.o integration. He's saying, beyond a qualitative assessment, were there any quantitative metrics that you could determine that an integration with Smile.io would be detrimental to trust due to it causing biased reviews?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we knew from previous studies that any sort of incentive could impact the review, and that was a quantitative study, meaning we looked at reviews that did have incentives and noticed that they had a higher rating. But again, that's not a measure of trust. It was just a measure of, do incentivized reviews lead to a higher rating? And then we could kind of infer that that would impact trust on our website because it's not really giving the best impression of a company.
Awesome. There's one for Sophie, which is also similar to I'm sure what a lot of us are thinking. Is your Trust Playbook available externally, or is it just for Trustpilot? I'll add on to that. If not, how do you even go about starting to build a Trust Playbook?
Yeah, great question. So it's not available publicly, but I will have to talk to our internal stakeholders to see if we can make it public, because maybe it would be useful for you guys to see exactly how we built it. But how we started it off was, as I mentioned, just thinking about what impacts trust for our product. And then we kind of turned that into a checklist. So every time we're building something new, we think about X, Y, and Z, and we think about how we can mitigate those risks. But I'll make sure to see if we can share it externally so you can kind of adapt it to your own needs.
Awesome. We've got one from Megan, and she's saying, do you measure long-term trust impact once features are released? And if so, how? What are your trust metrics?
Right, yeah. That's the golden question, right? And for my research for this presentation, I talked to a lot of people around the company and asked, okay, how do you measure trust in your part of the product? And nobody could give a straight answer to it. So the real answer is we do not measure long-term trust of specific features. It's more that when we're releasing the feature, we do, as I mentioned, usability and user interviews to think about how that feature has an impact on the overall journey, and if it relieves some sort of concern that the user has. That's how we measure trust in the moment, because it is in the small moments and it's an emotion, so it's tough to measure for your product overall. But if anyone in the audience has the silver bullet on how to measure trust, then please put that in the chat, because I want to know.
Yeah, how do you quantify an emotion?
Yeah.
Cool. James is asking, how do you balance prioritizing trust with the risk of over-engineering to avoid the hopefully small or managed risk of breaking that trust?
Yeah, so I think it gets down to making sure that in your trust playbook, you're only thinking about really the big things that impact trust. Because of course, you're always going to have maybe one user who's concerned about one thing that you didn't think about, and then it's really easy to over-engineer. But if you know your customers well enough, then you can have a good understanding of what are the top things that drive trust, and make sure to focus on those and not try to boil the ocean by alleviating everyone's concerns, because that can go, get you into a rabbit hole that's hard to get out of.
Cool. Alan's asking, this is a big question. Which tech company would you say has done more and why to demonstrate to damage trust in technology? So some very big figures about people who don't trust technology that you shared.
Right. That's a funny one, because trust is an emotion. So I'm just one person with one opinion, but maybe I'm biased because I'm in the review industry, but I think in our industry, at least, Amazon has done a lot to break trust, because there was that study coming out saying I think it was over 20-25% of their reviews are fake. And that actually benefited us because then more people thought, oh, reviews are fake. Where can we go to get better reviews, right? But I think, I mean, as we saw in the survey earlier, Amazon is a really trusted company. So I might be in the minority there. And it's probably a different answer for everyone.
Awesome. Alana's asking, with small features still being a risk of breaking trust, how often do you conduct usability interviews? Is it only for big features and releases, or do you conduct them on a more regular basis?
Yeah, good question. So it's kind of both. We conduct them on a regular basis across our whole product, but definitely if you have a big release, then conduct it as well. Again, I think it's hard to do usability interview on your whole product. It's more prioritizing based on, okay, this is an area where we see high drop off. Maybe that's due to mistrust, or an area that our customer success team says customers keep asking about, or support says customers are confused. Those kind of hotbeds of confusion or uncertainty can be a really good spot to prioritize interviews and testing.
Awesome. Probably got time for one more. Neil's asking, how do you think the concept of trust links to values, both those of the customer and those of the company?
They're very closely related, right? Because trust is an emotion, and it's really defined based on what values you have. And the reason that you trusted a company is going to be very different. So both from the user perspective, your definition of trust might be different. And as a company, based on your company's values, then maybe you can align your definition of trust with those values to make sure that you're giving out the right message, right? So very closely aligned. Yeah.